Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tammie Carlisle. I'm head of hospitality at Milestone Inc. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Bob Gilbert, who is president and CEO of the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association International. Bob is not only a CHME, but also a CHA, and has been guiding HSMAI through a very dynamic and exciting period of change as a 7,000 member association. An organization has been reestablished globally to grow revenue for hotels through sales, marketing, and revenue optimization. During Bob's tenure with HSMAI, they've achieved tremendous success with a number of initiatives, including the development of expert communities in the areas of sales, marketing, and revenue optimization, signature events in each discipline, including the upcoming Rock at Home next week, slight plug there off script, but hey, a portfolio of C-level executive roundtables, the development of HSMAI's university suite of certification programs, including the CHDM, again, another plug, and the global expansion of HSMAI through the formation of HSMAI Global and Regional Development in Europe, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East. Most recently, the model of the association has shifted a bit. And so in addition to individual memberships, there are now organizational memberships available to organizations to help grow and further improve their sales, marketing, and revenue optimization efforts. Bob holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the School of Hotel Administration at Cornell. And in addition, has been a member of HSMAI since back in the student days. So that was a couple years ago, right, Bob?
Long time ago. Thank you, Tammie. Call me out on it. Go ahead.
Just a few years back. You and I both, right? It's just been a few years. So frequent guest lecturer, not only at Cornell, but numerous associations, groups, industry partners such as ourselves. And as a past chair of the Events Industry Council, served on the board of directors of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, as well as the Travel and Tourism Coalition in the US as part of the US Travel Association. Bob also serves on several advisory boards for hospitality and hotel management schools. It's my pleasure I get to work with Bob as a member of the Marketing Advisory Board for HSMAI, and it's my pleasure to introduce my friend Bob Gilbert today. So thanks for being here, Bob.
Thank you, Tammie. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Of course, of course. So before we started, so as I mentioned, Bob is going to be chatting with us today, as well as myself as head of hospitality of Milestone. Bob, before we get going, I'd love if you just spend a minute maybe sharing with anyone that doesn't know on the line, what is HSMAI and the value of HSMAI to individuals and organizations?
Well, I think thank you, Tammie. I think the intro covered a little bit of it, but our mission simply is to help hotels grow their revenue through sales, marketing, and revenue optimization. We're a professional society, different from the American Hotel and Lodging Association, which is truly a trade association that represents the industry primarily as it relates to advocacy and government relations. Professional societies are about education, and that's what we do. We have a number of educational programs and services, the certification programs you mentioned. We have strategy conferences and signature events in each of the three pillars of our mission: sales, marketing, and revenue optimization. And right now we've been really busy at headquarters with facilitating a lot of online learning programs, because that's where, for the foreseeable future, people are going to upskill or reskill themselves. And unfortunately for the hotel industry, and a lot of our listeners probably, there's a lot of people with some time on their hands right now, particularly if they've been furloughed or laid off. And this is a perfect opportunity to really upskill or reskill yourself on things that are going to allow you to be more portable in your career path, and even beef up your resume in a few places.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, again, Bob, thank you for being here with us today. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get going. The recap of today's webinar, the video, the slide deck, and the kind of outlines will be available on the Milestone blog within the next probably 48 hours. So don't feel free to take notes. We love taking notes, but you will have access to that information. In addition, for those of you that are not familiar with Zoom webinar, all of the attendees have been muted. However, there is a Q&A box, and please feel free to ask questions as we go throughout. We did leave some time at the end for Q&A, and actually throughout the presentation, Bob and I will dialogue and have questions back and forth. So please feel free to ask those questions. I can see those, and we'll be adding those in towards the end. So let's kind of talk through today's agenda and framework. So we're going to start, for anyone that's been on any of Milestone's webinars over the last several months, we've had a whole series talking about crisis, recovery, and growth. And so we'll be covering I think a little more on the recovery portion of that framework. Let's all cross our fingers that the crisis mode, we're out of the worst and heading towards recovery. So we're going to talk about what does that look like? What are trends we're seeing? What is the new marketing funnel? Can we go back to business as usual, or what's changed? Making that specific case for your individual property or your brand or your group, and what's going to be different. Then we'll get into some specific recovery tactics. We could probably sit here for about 4 hours and go through recovery tactics. So it's definitely not an all-encompassing list, but I think a good high level of some different things you can do in the different components of framework. And then, like I said, we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So to start with, just to kind of give an overview of what we call the CRG, or the Crisis Recovery Growth Framework. The idea during the crisis phase was really, how do you connect and adjust and engage with your customers? How do you keep them interested even in a time period when they weren't buying? But we're starting to see that in a lot of markets, people are moving towards recovery. And so really trying to think through how to help in that new normal, right? What are the key channels you should be focusing on? And of course, that's, from our perspective, everything digital, but your website, your social channels, SEO, paying your content. How are you getting out in front of those guests and working to build confidence, working to build demand, right? We all want demand, working to help improve conversion, and how do we drive people to actually convert and stay in our hotels? And then lastly, building trust, which I think is an essential element in helping to drive conversion, build demand, and build that confidence. As time goes on, and I know we have some content coming up in the next several months, weeks and months, talking about growth and how to kind of take it to the next level. But for today, we're really going to focus on recovery. So one of the things we're seeing, and I think we've all seen the articles here and there about different markets improving, but just as a whole over the search market. So this, for those of you that aren't familiar, is Google's trends. You can get search query data on any term you're interested in, but obviously we're looking at the travel sector, and we're seeing a lot of pickup in interest for things like open hotels. Are your hotel open? And then what we've noticed is that business hotels have stayed fairly flat, maybe a little growth uptick, but family hotels and leisure and vacation has definitely seen an increase. So Bob, from your perspective with HSMAI, what are the trends you're seeing in consumer behavior and hotels markets during the reopening?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Tammie. I mean, the best place to start is really what's happening with organic search trends, because that's tell you who's searching for what. There's been a number of traveler sentiment studies released. I think most of them are doing it weekly, because things are changing so quickly, and there's so many variables in what's happening in different states and different countries and different market segments. We've tried to aggregate a lot of those sentiment surveys at HSMAI, so you can find a lot of them on our website for free, but they're also in our weekly insights newsletter that goes to all members. But clearly, one survey we did of our members globally said that 82% thought leisure was going to rebound first. And that's been validated by a lot of these other research trends. It depends on how you look at it, but in one case, there was one study said that the leisure would definitely come back first but there were three things that were going to be the most important to travelers, even before you break down the market segments in recovering and returning to hotels. One was their health, two was their finances, and three was their safety. So I think regardless of which market segment we talk about, we've got to keep in mind in all of your marketing and your messaging, those three things that are on top of mind of all consumers today. Because, you know, over the last 6 consecutive weeks, Deloitte has recently published a study that talks about the consumers' concern about their own health and the health of others has actually been declining over a 6-week period. It's still relatively high, but that trend is in the right direction. The same study talked about the consumers' concerns about making upcoming payments or delaying large purchases has also declined. So some of that anxiety's gone away. The travelers concern over the last 6 consecutive weeks about the safety of flying or staying in a hotel has also declined. So we're seeing everything trending in the right direction, but there's still a couple of wild cards out there. You know, the hotel and travel industry has 2 major headwinds it's facing. One is really just the overall economy and the impacts of this pandemic. The other thing is going to be the pandemic itself, because there's still some wild cards out there about that, and that will continue to be a headwind. When you dive into leisure, though, one study in April said that only 24% were planning to spend their anytime this summer at a hotel. Well, by mid-May, that jumped to 31%. I mean, still a pretty, you know, low intention. At least the trend is positive. And if you've listened into any of the STR webinars or read any of the reports from the last few weeks, I think a number of people were surprised that on Memorial Day weekend, the top occupancy markets in the US were all beach vacations. And I think 3 of the top 5 were in Florida. And even a couple of those markets had year-over-year increases compared to last year. So there's clearly some pent-up demand on the leisure side, and particularly the drive market's going to come back first. And I think the other markets we can talk about later as it relates to corporate travel, business travel, and meetings and conventions, but leisure will come back first. But you got to keep in mind the things they're still concerned about.
Absolutely. No, and I definitely agree with you on that has been the general consensus, leisure first, then business. And we'll talk about business in here in just a minute. But yeah, interestingly to what you said, you know, we are seeing occupancy increases across the states. Now, are we back to where we were, you know, in October, November last year? Probably not. And I keep thinking about sitting at the marketing strategy conference in January, and there was a lot of talk about, yeah, we might be headed towards that, you know, that little R word of recession, but I don't think anyone could have foreseen just how quickly we'd spike or you know, down. The good news is a lot of the studies I'm seeing have kind of said the same thing. It's going to be a very quick sharp upturn. And while we won't be back to where we were in August, you know, that we are going to recover quickly. This is not going to be a, you know, 5-10 years before we're back to where we were. Are you hearing the same thing, or what are you hearing?
Yes and no. I think for the leisure, a lot of that could happen. I think for the corporate travel and meetings and conventions travel, the variables are very different. There was a CRB study out last week that projected the number of quarters it would take and the outlook for the economy for the hotel industry to get back to where it was in pre-COVID, and they're predicting anywhere from 14 to 24 quarters. So, I mean, I'm sorry, 14 to 18 quarters. So we're talking, you know, could be 2 to 3 years. They're saying within the 12 months, we could be back up to 70% of the indexes where we were pre-COVID. But again, there's just so many variables. It's why I would advise everybody to monitor all the sentiment indexes that are coming out, because we're dealing with a landscape globally that the hotel industry has never dealt with before. You know, airlines are still reserving the rights to totally change their schedules, you know, 14 to 21 days prior to departure. Right now, you can buy a trip to go anywhere, and the schedules in September may look really robust. But when it comes 14 days prior to your trip, the airlines are only going to fly the routes they know they need to fly. So there's all sorts of implications that travelers maybe can't control. So there's a lot of variables out there that I think it's not optimistic, it's not pessimistic. It's going to continue to be a volatile situation on a week-to-week basis until ultimately until there's a vaccine, I think, discovered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's interesting. We've been talking about leisure. Let's talk about business for a minute, because you're right. Every study, every person I've talked to, both on the partner side or the hospitality side, have pretty much unanimously said leisure first. And we definitely think leisure is going to come back quicker, faster, stronger, better. On the business traveler side, what we're seeing, is kind of to your point, that health and safety, right? Upgraded cleaning standards. They want to know that they're going to be safe, they're clean. They want to see that, in a lot of cases, that the employees are wearing masks, that they've been trained on how to properly clean, on how to properly prevent anything from happening, and then continue to communicate. But what's interesting, and I think you and I chat a little bit about this in the last week, but GBTA just released that study that showed that about 41% of those corporate travel managers that were surveyed thought that business travel would actually resume in the near future. Our message has been, from a business hotel perspective, if you're largely business, and I'm thinking Silicon Valley and other markets in the US that have been predominantly business, that you really need to diversify your client base. You feel the same way? What are you seeing?
I think absolutely diversification is going to be critical for every hotel to almost reboot their market mix and how they're strategizing. I thought the GBT study was interesting because you go back to where it started. When they did that same study a month before the numbers you just quoted, you quote the May numbers. In April, the study found that 98% of their member companies had canceled international trips and 92% canceled domestic trips. So there's no question in April and May, we really bottomed out. So to say that, nearly half of those now we're going to go back and start traveling again, that's a good thing. But there's all these other logistics, if you will, that are still, holding some of that back. On the companies want to travel. There's pent up demand there. There are certain sectors of corporate travel where people need to do business face to face. I mean, historically, that's how deals get done. So it will come back, but it's going to come back differently with those same overarching things people need to think about. One is their own health and the health of others. Two is going to be what's it going to, the financial situation of the company in this case, not the individual. And then thirdly, the safety. Now the airlines have some restrictions about, middle seats and things like that. Some of that's been extended till September, but even that is fluid, and it can change by country or by airline pretty quickly. So everybody's going to just have to stay on top of all these different changes and be prepared to pivot and be flexible and shift your strategy appropriately. And fortunately, in the digital world today, you can pivot your strategy pretty quickly and pretty inexpensively, but you got to have somebody steering that plan.
Yeah. So if I'm predominantly a business hotel, what kinds of things do you think I could or should be doing to really help shift that strategy and go after that leisure market?
Well, identify what demand is in your market. I mean, there have been some hotels, and some of this has been in the press, that have really gone into alternate use. I mean, some hotels are being leased out entirely, or floors of rooms, to college housing, because think about the ramifications of the college and university industry. You can't put 2 or 4 people in a dorm room anymore because of social distancing. So there are other hotels that for the foreseeable future still have first responders. That's not going to evaporate overnight. There's a lot of that business that's still out there. So what are other demand generators in your market or alternative uses that you can look at? And finding new demand generators is never easy. It takes some diligence from a sales and marketing perspective to identify and research where you can capture demand and get really creative. So I think when we're looking back at this 6 months or a year down the road, I suspect the shining stars we're going to see are the sales and marketing people that were the most aggressive and the most innovative, and really came up with some new things to add to their toolbox and add to their marketing mix that hotels didn't know they could accommodate before. Some hotels are even leasing rooms on a long-term basis to office space that has to accommodate social distancing. So I think for some markets and some hotels, anything is on the table depending upon how severe the demand has been impacted in your market.
Awesome. Oh, that's fantastic. And it's interesting because you actually authored a blog post on, kind of in the early stages of this, encouraging people not to cut sales, marketing, and, kind of called that their revenue infrastructure. So given you're talking about, okay, some business hotels making changes or people kind of having to be fluid and dynamic, do you have some examples of companies, businesses that maybe took your words to heart or at least followed your prescribed plan and are doing well?
Yeah, I definitely got some feedback on that article, Tammie. You're absolutely right. I think one of the most encouraging calls for me was one from an asset manager that said, "Thank you for putting that on paper for us." Because asset managers typically take a bad rap in terms of cut, manage. I need to know my forecast and the ROI on everything from A to Z. But if an ownership group has the liquidity to do what's right, the smart asset managers know that the last thing you want to cut is anybody that's is in the business of generating revenue. And generating revenue is what sales, marketing, and revenue optimization is all about. So those people need to be there. Unfortunately, so much of the hotel industry is so over leveraged that a lot of companies don't have the liquidity to be able to afford them that luxury, or they've pared back staff to the level that those people that should be focusing on the plan for recovery and revenue generation are being distracted, and they're still checking people in, they're cleaning rooms, they're doing other operational type things that are keeping them from the revenue generating side of their business, which supposedly is what they're best at. So I would say for anybody who's in a position of management, continue to advocate for the fact that if you're in a revenue generating position, make sure you're doing that. Make sure you are prospecting, make sure you're communicating with your current customers, let them know what's going on. Somebody needs to be there to book the business that wants to come in 6 months from now or 9 months from now. Just because your hotel may be closed or you're running a low occupancy now doesn't mean that there isn't business there for the future. That's your job. There were a couple of companies that were outliers that didn't furlough or lay people off, at least in the masses, if at all. And I think two of them, that this is public information. One was Las Vegas Sands Corporation. I mean, Sheldon Adelson took out an editorial in the Las Vegas newspaper talking about this is his chance to show his employees why you should be in the hospitality business for life. And they didn't lay off a single person, where a lot of other companies on the Strip did. Rosewood Hotels is in a similar situation. But again, we're making assumptions now that these companies have the liquidity to be able to do that for their employees. A lot of companies didn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're preaching to the choir as far as sales, marketing, and revenue optimization being very important for hotels. So hopefully many of us that are on today's webinar are actually helping to generate new revenue for our hotels. And that's obviously the goal for today. I'm going to shift gears just slightly and talk, we talked about safety, security, cleanliness. So I know one of the things we've seen is like Airbnb, right? Which we could probably spend 2 hours talking about Airbnb versus the hospitality industry, but there's been a lot of communication around cleanliness and, giving information to their hosts about how to keep the virus in check, how to provide great experiences. And then we're getting, the kind of the backside of that on the hotel side. If you think about how often a hotel is cleaned, I mean, realistically, hospitals, hotels, right? It's pretty cleanliness. So how do you think hotels can kind of compete against some of the Airbnb messaging and you kind of tout some of our cleaning standards and the things that we're doing to, again, make sure that this virus doesn't impact the travelers so that they do feel safe and comfortable staying with us?
Well, I think you've just touched on a big part of it. You've got to communicate to your current and prospective guests what you're doing, because the differentiation between a typical hotel and alternative housing is going to be like night and day, literally, because there's the frequency, there's this dedicated staff that's doing it all the time. You've got a whole different inspection process for your rooms now that have been even upgraded beyond what our industry has ever seen by certain brands and the new H&LA standards now. But I think if people are still wired up about the competitive nature of alternative housing, keep in mind alternative housing options are here to stay. And I think you need to, if it's a competitive thing you're worried about, you can clearly differentiate the product. But it goes back to marketing 101. Know who your customers are. And if you're targeting the right customer, then they're going to be looking for the safety. They're going to be looking for the security. They're going to be looking for the legitimate, professionally run operations, as opposed to where they want to go couch surf somewhere. And I'm speaking generally, but I think the mindset will need to change on alternative housing. I remember I was at a meeting one time back in the days of face-to-face meetings when I had a select service GM come up to me, and he didn't understand why everybody was really so negative about the alternative housing market. He says, well, it's really good business for me. And I said, really, why? And he said, well, I use a downtown hotel. I was a select service property. He says, I have 75 units within a 4-block radius of my hotel. He says, I do all their housekeeping. He says, my room service menus are in all of their units. He said, some of the unit owners pay me to have people come to my desk and pick up their key. So he turned the glass up half full instead of half empty, and he created a whole revenue stream of ancillary revenue for his hotel based on providing services to these 75 units within a 4-block of his hotel. So I think that mindset it illustrates the way we're going to have to think differently in the foreseeable future about generating business and generating revenue for the businesses we work for. And that's the type of innovation and creativity that I'm excited a year from now, we're going to be looking back and finding all those shining stars of people that did some really cool stuff that we can all learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look forward to hanging out with you, hopefully at Rock later this year, and the Marketing Strategy Conference in early, 2021. Oh my goodness. And having those conversations about what people have done to innovate and how they've continued to grow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously we're seeing, you mentioned it, a lot of pent up demand. And I know I booked 4 trips before the end of the year. First one being in August, fingers crossed, assuming everything goes well and reopen. I was supposed to be in Europe earlier in about a month, and that obviously is not happening for a variety of reasons this year, hopefully next year. What we're seeing, and I'll ask your kind of take on it as well, but what we're seeing is that, to your point, the audience for this pent-up demand is predominantly local, a lot of drive market, but also short plane hops. My first trip in August will be a short plane hop, and anybody that knows me well probably has one guess as to where I'm headed, fingers crossed. Looking for that leisure travel within driving distance, looking for activities and things, packages that kind of pull things together. There's been a lot of talk about, hey, restaurants in the area aren't open, although in most markets now they've at least opened, like even here in the Bay Area, most of our restaurants are now open for outdoor dining at least. So there is something along those lines. There is still concern about safety. We're seeing that the demand is rapidly growing, and we're seeing that because a lot of companies didn't listen to your article and pulled back either on the sales and marketing folks or on the marketing budgets. So, paid search, cost per clicks are at some of the lowest we've seen in years. And so there's a huge opportunity to grow, which has been great for a lot of our clients. But are you optimistic that that's going to continue and that we're going to see continued growth as we're going into the summer and the fall and then the holiday season?
I think in the leisure market, absolutely, and you hit it spot on, Tammie. Particularly in the drive markets. I think the airline, the fly, there may not be people packing up a family of 4 or 6 on a plane. They may drive 300 or 400 or 500 miles first before they would fly. but I think it's going to be different per sub-segment of the leisure market. Are you talking about couples, talking about families, and so forth? So I think those hotels that have really powerful destination type leisure attributes have the opportunity to do really, really well, and they should certainly take advantage of that. I think the one that will come back the latest will be that long haul travel, because that's still where there's the most risk is still associated with it. Because travelers just don't know. Unless you're a regular international traveler, and even if you are, there's an extra set of concerns you need to think about. What if I get quarantined over there, or there's an outbreak again that pops up? That's what is in the back of people's mind when they keep thinking about health. If people don't practice social distancing safely, will there be a surge again, like has been happening in Iran right now? They've got a surge going on again, and there are different, metrics that are measuring this by country. So we can learn from other countries and what they've seen, and hopefully that would be a lesson to most people here in the U.S. Practice of social distancing and stay safe, and that's going to create some travel plans to shift. Fortunately, so far they've just been postponed. Very few have been canceled, but I think leisure this summer can be very, very strong.
And that's a great sentiment too, to really monitor what's happening in other countries, especially those like China, where they maybe closed down a little bit before we did, and they come back a little bit before we did, to look for those trends, look for are we seeing secondary outbreaks, hotspots, and what can we do to make sure that travel continues to be strong. Great points, Bob.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not just the U.S. This is truly a global issue. And one of the metrics we've seen is that other countries, hotels that were closed are opening within a range of 14 to 16 weeks after the pandemic spiked in their market. So they're seeing it decline, and then that 14 to 18 week window. And the CRB research I quoted before has identified the 4 stages, if you will, of how hotels are dealing with the pandemic and how they're opening. The first stage is really when they're still in lockdown or free fall. And fortunately, right now, the only country in the world that's still in that category is Brazil. The next category is where there's semi-easing, a little bit of lockdown. The third category is gradual opening. And then the fourth category, they call it 70% normal life. And actually, there's only 5 countries in the world that are in that category, and China's leading the way in that. And the other 3 countries are all in Europe. The US is still in that second category, that semi-easing, if you will. They're right there with Spain and the UK and a few other countries. The gradual openings, hopefully we'll get to that within the next 30 to 60 days. By the time we get to the summer season, it should be well on our way to that fourth stage. But you can map this by country, and you can learn by what those other countries have been through to see, how they can protect themselves and what best practices are working for them that certainly we should be adopting here.
Oh, fantastic. So as we talk about, adopting things in recovery, like you said, the U.S. is starting to open back up again, and we're not business as usual, but we're definitely seeing some demand. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing and what we're recommending from a hotel recovery, kind of a funnel and a thought process. And really it boils down into 4 key components, and we'll talk through some different elements within this, but really it's about building that confidence that, hey, you can travel. And when we're thinking of KPIs and things that hotels should be measuring along this line, that this is going to help with their visibility, their presence, kind of getting back into market share. And then building that demand. So obviously if some of the beach markets out there are doing great with gaining demand. I know I'm dreaming of a beach vacation, but measurement wise, right? Visits, traffic, are people actually coming to your website? Are they visiting your content, wherever that is, your social channels, your paid ads and the like? And then of course, everyone's favorite, drive conversions, right? And of course the metric there is, are you making money? Are you driving revenue? Are you getting people to book? And then of course, lastly, building on that trust. How do you convince people that it's safe to travel, that they should trust you and they should come stay with you. So we'll kind of delve in a little bit into each of these sections. This will be a little bit more tactical with the questions like, but on the building confidence front, one of the things we talked about was, cleanliness guidelines and that. And of course, HLA put out some great guidelines. I know many of the brands have also come out, I'll throw out Marriott and Hilton, but a lot of the brands have come out with various cleaning social guidelines. I know HSMAI is a sales, marketing, and revenue optimization organization. We probably aren't usually thinking cleanliness at the forefront, but would love your thoughts on the HLA guidelines and how hotels can use these to market themselves.
Well, I think you touched on it already, Tammie, and well, I mean, certainly we applaud what H&LA did in the hotel brands, because that's exactly the ammunition that good marketers need to be able to do what you said is step number one, and that's build confidence. I mean, there's a number of variables in confidence, but this is a big part of it. So the more the hotel industry as a whole can get ahead of that curve in terms of preempting or questioning the whole stay safe components of what is going to keep a guest from being confident about traveling, all the better. So this is good for the whole industry, absolutely. But as marketers, you've got to make sure whether you use that seal, you're communicating it in your marketing, any of your pre-arrival type messaging, people are dreaming. And so confidence is building. But you've got to be ready to, once they're ready to buy, you've got to be there in that funnel. But the confidence is probably, we saw it bottom out in March and April. Is slowly building. This is one great thing for the marketing toolkit to make sure you're leveraging.
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. And a few other things, obviously to your point, that messaging, right? Having information on your website, your homepage. I know there's a lot of talk. We've been working with clients on creating like care pages that talk a little less about COVID itself, but a little more about now that we're coming into recovery and what we're doing. And then incorporating things like, FAQs wrapped in schema that, again, thinking from a marketing perspective and a SEO perspective. So as people are searching, but to your point, instilling that confidence, there's these great guidelines, you're putting that messaging out there on your website. You mentioned pre-stay, like, emails and that. What other areas or how else do you think that hotels can communicate that that they are safe and clean and kind of build that confidence?
Well, I'd say you've got the key website stuff. Don't forget your social media channels. Don't forget your loyalty program. If you've got one as part of a brand, who are your key stakeholders or your influencers? It could be, if you're a big group house, who are the intermediaries that you work with a lot? I mean, any of those stakeholders you have that you are typically selling to, this is part of that whole communication strategy that you should be doing right now, because the proactive selling in some markets, it may be a little premature for that, but you still need to be communicating with your stakeholders and your customers. Especially if you want to try and convert more leisure, think about what are the promotions and stuff you should or could be doing where this needs to be a part of that messaging.
Fantastic. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on from building confidence. Hopefully we've built confidence with everyone, and move on to building demand. How do we get people to come stay with us? And, it's kind of interesting. One of the things we're really focusing on with clients right now is that client kind of go local, right? Really thinking through, and it's funny because I've been at Milestone a long time, 13 and a half years. I started when I was 10. And we've always talked about local activities, attractions, things to do in the market. But this, I think, is taking it a step further and really kind of thinking through not only the what's open, but a lot of people, what we're seeing is a want for nature. So hotels and places where there's a lot to do kind of outside in a way, where they can very safely social distance, but also just smaller activities, some Central Park secret corners, but in things like walking tours, or what attractions are open, what are the dining options. And so really trying to create content around local. And I'd be curious, Bob, from your perspective, I mean, again, experience was a differentiator even before COVID, right? This, like I said, we've been talking about for years, the experience, the destination. You're not just marketing your hotel, but you're marketing where you are. How do you think hotels should consider enhancing that experience in this post-COVID era?
Well, it's a tough one, Tammy. I think it's going to be a bit of a moving target. I think some of the hotels that they need to be flexible and be able to respond to the guest as the guest wants to be responded to. And until they walk in, or until you have that first phone conversation with them at a point of reservation, if that's the case, you may not know. Some guests may want to isolate themselves in their room, which means the hotels that were designed recently that have all of this social gathering space off the near the lobby area that may be empty. We've heard from a couple of hotel companies and a couple of advisory board members that said when they had these big occupancies on Memorial Day weekend, the number one guest complaint they got was not about the hotel. They said the hotel did everything beautifully, but it was about other guests who were not social distancing or taking precautions where they should have been. So those are some of the things that you can't plan for necessarily, other than doing the best job you can to provide an experience to each guest one at a time, and try and identify what are some of the sensitivities they have, and making sure they're respectful of the other guests to the extent that you're able. So I think that's going to be a challenging one from an operations perspective going forward. Once people are on property, how do you really touch them differently? In the pre-arrival funnel, I think there's a number of things marketers can do to make sure you're listening and hearing the comments and things that they're saying in terms of why did they make the decision, or any special requests. Do they have the ability for the keyless entry, and can they text somebody if they need something? Contactless environment. But somebody may not want a contactless environment. So every customer is going to be different. So that experience, I think, has now been bifurcated once again. That's going to make it more challenging for operators. So that's going to be something we're really all going to have to watch.
Absolutely. And I think, that on-property experience, and like I said, I'm looking forward to the first, my first plane ride in a few months, and, hotel stay in August, and how different it's going to be than what we're used to. And obviously there's all the things you got to think about when the guest is there, but you mentioned too, a lot of things, even pre-arrival and also pre-booking, right? To build that demand. And one of the other things we're seeing, again, paid search, cost per clicks right now are at all-time lows, although even on some channels they're starting to creep back up as more people are getting back in the game. Creating those search ads, messaging, talking to different kinds of components. We're seeing that, again, we've talked about this a lot, that drive markets are going to be stronger than that out of area. That, the chances, I'm out here in California, of me flying to Florida versus driving or flying to Southern California, obviously I'm probably more likely to do the latter. How can hotels adjust and to that opportunity and capitalize on some of these things?
Well, you asked the question earlier, what if somebody was more typically a commercial hotel and wanted more leisure business? I think you just have to really say, if you want to build your leisure mix of business, build a specific plan against it. Whether you want to grow it from 60% of your business to 80, or you want to grow it from 5% to 15, you've got to sit down and identify a target and a plan, and you're going to have to think differently about how you've gotten it. Certainly thinking of the strategy and search is a big part of it, but which channels are better? Can you leverage your loyalty database or that loyalty program that you may have differently? What feeder markets are you looking at, and what can you be doing in those particular feeder markets, particularly if it's a drive market? And historically, maybe you had a fly-in market that was your leisure business before. Social media stuff, or specific promotions you can do in those feeder markets. Maybe even some of the more traditional advertising comes back, like radio or promotions that you're doing in some feeder markets. I think people are going to have to just think differently about how they allocate their resources and measure the ROI they're getting on specific initiatives, that complement or supplement the things they're doing virtually and digitally via search.
I think those are fantastic points. So thank you for sharing those. I'm going to, in the interest of time, move on to the third component, which is driving conversions. And, we talked a little bit here about dining options, again, thinking through that a lot of hotel restaurants either aren't open yet or are starting to open back up, and packaging in a way so I don't have to try and find a restaurant in my local market that's open. Hearing a lot of things on contactless menus, QR codes, and I know we're doing some of that for our customers as well. From a packaging standpoint, from a pricing, kind of building demand, building that conversion standpoint, do you have any guidance on things like pricing, discounting? I know the revenue optimization side of the coin is don't discount, don't drop our rates. Would love kind of your take on that question.
Well, I think, if you're trying to drive demand, obviously packaging and so it gives you the ability to price things opaquely in a manner that it can have higher value. But I think the most important thing when it comes to pricing, whether it's rooms or F&B, is be authentic and provide value. And if anybody on your team or your manager or your asset manager needs a refresher course on why not to discount, have them go back and watch the webinar we did back in March with Carter Wilson from STR. I mean, they have done a whole case study from the last recession on why discounting doesn't work. And that's the way you have to look at it ethically, and is what happened when we've been through a time of a deep drop of demand before, and it's been proven statistically that those that discount the most are the last to recover. It takes them much longer to recover. So you need to be thinking about not what do you do right now, but how are you building your credibility for the recovery. So whatever you do, know what your demand is and price it logically with value and price it ethically.
Awesome.
And that's the way you should be doing it all the time, actually. Don't let the demand decline distract you from doing what's right from a pricing perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to your point too, providing value, and whether that's, packaging with a restaurant packaging or just offering experiences, offering content around what can guests do, I think will help them provide value, whether it's, as part of that dedicated local page, whether it's some additional things, whether it's in a pre-stay email. But the more, you're spot on, I think the more value we give our hotel guests, the more likely we are to recover quicker. One of the other things we're seeing a lot of success with is things around limited time offers, right? Special short-term offers to try and capture, hey, if you book by the state, in fact, airline offer got me to my August trip is because, hey, if I book by Friday, oh wow, these are really cheap rates. Doing things, limited time offers around whether it's holidays, whether it's just special events or incentives in the short term to get people to travel. We're seeing a lot of things around being flexible, providing some different guarantees. Like what kind of flexibility and guarantees do you think right now is most important to get people, to get our customers to actually book?
It's a good question. And definitely there's a lot of time sensitive offers out there right now that the cruise industry is just ramping up on what we're going to see a long tail of time sensitive offers for them. But for hotels, I think like the airlines, I think we can assume that any type of non-refundable, rate type is going to be obsolete for most hotels in most markets for the foreseeable future. The sentiment studies, again, say customers want flexibility. And I think we've got to be able to adapt to that. You can have a promotion that has a deadline, but I think when you start getting into the things we historically have done, that's a non-refundable advance purchase type of rate, I think those probably aren't going to sell very well because people want to just maintain flexibility. And candidly, unless you're in a really high demand time, you probably shouldn't be doing that anyways. But if you got plenty of rooms to spare, you're going to be able to be flexible. Your operations people and your forecast people may not like it, but the reality is that's going to be the landscape we're going to be dealing with for most market segments for the foreseeable future. So just, again, learn how to adapt and be flexible around that. To get the conversion, but expect the fact that things could change, whether it's meetings and conventions business, which continues to be rebooked and rebooked and rebooked, or it's a corporate business trip that gets rescheduled and rescheduled and rescheduled, or a leisure person that wants the flexibility to come from the 4th of July to the 10th of July. We just need to be prepared for that.
Perfect, perfect. So the last component of the recovery framework is building trust. And I'm just going to go through quickly this time, just kind of about, there's a lot of different things I think we can do to improve trust. One of the things we're seeing is having a lot of signage, having a lot of visibility when the guest is on property, right? So you see like QR codes for menus or QR codes with details on their policies. I know a lot of hotels have removed, the magazines and all the extra stuff from the rooms, and just have kind of basic experience, basic information to improve the experience. Curious, Bob, from your perspective, what are some other ways do you think that hotels can communicate and build that trust with their guests, both pre, during, and then post stay?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the topic, Tammie, because trust is really going to be important. It's at the top of a lot of these sentiment surveys that customers want to go somewhere where they can feel like they're in a trusted environment. But at the same time, marketers need to keep in mind, trust is not a checklist. You can say, these are the 10 things I'm going to do and I will have accomplished it. Trust is a perception that people create about your product or your service over time. And it's like, for branded hotels, it's especially tough because as good as your hotel may be, if you've got one bad apple in the brand, it may tarnish the trust of that brand. And so you still got to stand on your own that make your customers trust you for at least the extent of their experience. But again, if you're in the pre-booking funnel, you still have to be visible and promote the things that will portray the fact that you've done all the right things to gain their trust. When they're on site, you have the chance to actually, capitalize on that and prove that you can do it. And then hopefully post-visit, they're going to talk about it and help exude, if you will, that aura of trust that you want about your specific property. But trust is a journey. It's not a checklist. You can just, go and do it one at a time. I think people are looking for the authenticity of the experience. You talked about experience before. They're looking for that professional communication, particularly pre-arrival. They want to see empowered employees that can solve simple issues. And then you got to deliver on those promises. I mean, those are some of the things that, will earn you trust over time.
Awesome. No, I think you're spot on, and kind of back to your authenticity and providing value. I think are core components throughout in all 4 of these things. So I want to thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up with I have a couple more questions, then I think there are some audience questions, but just wanted to share with everyone again, we will be sending out, there'll be a recap video, links to, so here is both HSMAI and Milestone have coronavirus recovery resource pages on our websites. We'll have those links as well. Bob, I think we've talked about it throughout, but would love for you to kind of share how HSMAI can help hotels and the attendees that are on the line.
Well, I mean, think of us as really your education resource. The resource center itself is open to anybody in the industry at this point in time. There's a lot of great stuff there. Again, as I said earlier, we're really the aggregator of a lot of the sentiment studies that are there. We're pushing out to members on a weekly basis, studies that are updated weekly, but you'll find all the past ones here in the Recovery Resources Center. The things that we produced are really the HSMAI insights, the customer insights are all the sentiment surveys. Then the industry insights are all the other reports that are out there about the economy and things like that. So definitely worth spending some time. If you're looking for something, you can also search it. But I think outside of the Resource Center, we have a number of ongoing educational programs. Right now, there's been a spike for the amount of online learning that's getting done, whether people are achieving certifications or taking any of our essentials classes. We have a series of 4 essentials a sales essentials, a digital essentials, an analytics essentials, a revenue essentials. These are like 5-week classes with a facilitator online. So you spend an hour a week. This is a great opportunity to do that kind of stuff and reskill or upskill or make sure you're skilled to be portable in other areas if you are looking to build up your competencies in some other areas. So this is a great time to do that. And a lot of those things have been discounted as well, because we want to be sensitive to people that have to pay for it out of their own pocket versus their company paying for it these days. The one other thing that's worth mentioning is we also have a business acumen certification that is not about just sales, marketing, or revenue. It's really about learning the business of hotels from the seat of a general manager. It's a simulation course that I think is fantastic, because if you're relatively new to the industry or you're relatively new in sales or marketing, you need to, or revenue, you need to understand how a hotel operates and how to read a financial statement. And this business acumen class does all that stuff. So that would be another great resource. So go to HSMI University. You can find all the different programs we have in terms of the online courses. There's some self-study courses. There's some books you can read. There's a wide variety of things that you can plug into. And that's what we do. We're there to help.
Fantastic. And like I said, longtime supporter, longtime member, and honored to be on the marketing advisory board. I'm going to wrap up, and then there are a couple of questions from the audience. So top 3 takeaways, Bob. We've covered a lot. We've talked through a lot, but what are your top 3 takeaways for recovery for our hotels on the line?
I'll be quick on that. I think I'll sound like a broken record on this, but number one is know your customer, know your travel sentiment. The marketing 101 starts with knowing your customers, right? Now more than ever, that's really, really important, because things are changing on a regular basis. So you've got to make sure you know what the traveler sentiment is. Number 2 is plan your strategy. And we've said things are going to be different. The days of doing the 5-year business plans, I think we can throw all those out the window. Most companies at best are going to be able to anticipate how to pivot on a quarter-to-quarter basis. In some cases, month-to-month, depending on your market. But you got to plan your strategy. Know your owner's objectives. Leverage your brand or your franchise. Those should always be the fundamentals then. And if you're still in a situation where you've got silos in your hotel or your company, get rid of those. There's no time for egos or anything else when everybody has to be operating at 125% efficiency to get the right thing done with a good return on investment. And the last thing I would say, the third thing is just commit to continual learning. If there's another overarching theme we've talked about today, Tammie, it's just people have to constantly reskill and upskill themselves, because this is a changing environment. The industry has never witnessed a downturn as severe as this, and the recovery is going to take a different mindset and a different way of thinking about the things that we have always done before. So you've got to be continually learning how to do that. And again, as we said, a year from now, I can't wait to see all the shining stars of people that are really going to be innovators, if you will. At HSMA, we're calling them Hospitality Heroes, which is a new program we just launched, and we're going to be honoring heroes every month going forward now, of people that have just gone above and beyond to do some really cool stuff. So we look forward to recognizing those innovators and best practice owners.
Yeah, that's a great program. I saw that come out a few weeks ago, and really excited. Also big believers in education, obviously, and just so grateful for you to share your time today with the audience, so that we can all learn and grow and come out of this stronger, recover faster, stronger, and better than we were before. So I want to appreciate, thank you, and appreciate the time. We do have just a couple minutes for questions. So for those of you on the line, feel free to type questions into the box. I'm going to go through and list a couple, and then if we don't have time to answer your questions, we'll put those answers in the recap as well. So one of the questions was around, your thoughts on how to change perspective. A lot of times, and I think this is specifically on the paid front, but a lot of times people think of marketing in general as an expense. So how to shift that mindset, whether it's the asset manager or the owner or the GM, on changing the perspective of marketing being an expense to being a revenue generator. You know, a lot of companies will typically view marketing as an expense and not a cost of sales.
I think, Tammie, that's an interesting one. I think that's a mindset. If everybody knows how to benchmark and justify and calculate the return on investment of their marketing budget overall or specific initiatives, then that they need to communicate that to their ownership. If the ownership of a mindset is it's a disposable line item, then you've got some work to do to change that mindset. But I think it starts with marketers to be able to justify what they're doing, and they need to know that they're doing the right activities at the right place at the right time to basically optimize the return on that investment. There are times it won't work, but that's part of the trial and error. That's what marketers should be doing. There's not a Fortune 500 company or a consumer product or another industry vertical that doesn't have a research and development. Hotels don't have that. But part of that falls under marketing to do trial and error, do testing, what works, what doesn't work. The big online travel agencies have perfected that process of trial and error. And there's no reason that we shouldn't have protect a marketing budget that says, hey, this is how we are going to learn and grow and find what is best for us. So there's always going to be a part of that. Not everything can always be attributed exactly the way people might like it, but you've got to be able to tell the story with your strategy that justifies the investment.
Awesome. Awesome. I think we have time for one last question. And this was asked fairly early on. I think we touched on it a bit, but I'll just bring it back up. And for urban hotels that are located in areas with most local attractions, retail, restaurants, events, etc., still restricted, how would you suggest trying to attract customers to your hotel?
I would say that they should make sure they're using some of the resources at Milestone, because you've got to identify what are the other unique attributes of the property. And I would think probably pivot a lot of your keywords in your search to be able to make sure you're targeting the right audience. You probably still want to be linked to those attractions, because if people are searching those, that they're closed, they're going to know that you're nearby, but it should lead them to something else, I would think. Tammie, I defer to you more on some of the specific tactics on that, but I think a lot of that's going to have to do with finding the unique attributes for the property or other demand generators in the vicinity versus the signature or legacy attractions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this question came in before we talked about some of the Go Local content information. And I think that really is it. How do you think outside the box? How do you figure out, what can people do and why would they come? Are there things that are still happening? And then it's also being mindful of when restrictions are going to be lifted. I'm thinking of some markets here in California that restrictions are being lifted on Friday. Well, you can start marketing, they've known for a week or two, start marketing that the second you know. But even before restrictions were lifted, there were still some things you could do to try and go after that essential traveler, for example.
Yeah, Tammie, before I think a lot of hotels try to create events and special events. I mean, Opryland in Nashville was famous for creating Christmas, in December to build their occupancy for the whole month of December. But I think in the world of social distancing, I think there could still be event creation. It's going to be just small groups or couples types of events or family type of events. Again, I'm excited to see what type of creativity comes out of the industry 6 months from now that has created demand in ways we never thought we could before.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we've hit the top of the hour. So Bob, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Everyone on the line, again, I appreciate your attendance. The webinar recap will be up on our blog in the next few days. And if you have any questions that weren't answered or anything you want to know, you can reach out to Bob and I. We'll have contact details on the end of the slide. And again, Bob, thank you so much. Have a fantastic afternoon.
You too. Thank you for having me, Tammie. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.